Hello and welcome to the Seren Stay-at-Home Series archive. In this video, Peter Finch joins us to read from his two most recent books, Walking Cardiff and the Machineries of Joy. We hope you enjoy watching it back.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our Finch Zoom tonight. I can say a few words about Peter. He's quite an extensive bibliography, which I'm assured that most of you probably know already, but we'll have a quick run through here. Peter was of course the editor of Second Aeon magazine, a famous magazine in the 60s, and kept going until 1975, I believe. Fantastic magazine. I feel like I almost worked for this magazine. I know so much about it now. I'm hoping Peter still has a few copies somewhere. Do you have any copies left whatsoever?
I do.
Oh, he still does. There we go.
No, I don't have any for sale, but I do have some.
Okay,
I could have my arm twisted on one of them, maybe.
In the archive.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and also Peter was instrumental. I knew him, first of all, from running various incarnations of Oriel Bookshop and Gallery in Cardiff, which he also did for a number of years. The famous Oriel Bookshop that always hosted poets from all over the world, had a fantastic selection of poetry, was your go-to place for poetry back in the day. Right, what else has Peter done? He's edited and written numerous books now. I'm not quite sure how many there are. Is it something like 20? It's a big show. It's a wide show, right? But it's fabulous. And I'll mention only a few of the most recent ones. The recent years, he's really done a lot with psychogeography and numerous books about Cardiff and the history and the psychogeography of Cardiff. The whole Zen of Cardiff is at his feet. And I believe there are 5 versions of Cardiff.
There are?
Yes,
there are.
5 versions of Cardiff. There's also... he's edited the whole real series of travel books. So there's an echelon now of real books. Most recently, he did a book, Edging the Estuary, because he's a prolific walker and traveler all throughout Wales. Edging the Estuary is the Severn Estuary. Talks about that. There's also Roots of Rock, which talk about his memories of the blues and goes on the blues trail on Route 66 in America. There's also his recent Walking Cardiff, which I've been doing on my bike because it takes quite a while to do each one of the little circuits on Walking Cardiff. But it's a brilliant thing to do also if you're taking your walk in lockdown and you're in Cardiff. Just pick one out of the book and off you go. And I've now been lost in areas of Cardiff I never knew existed. So I have Pete to thank for that one. His most recent poetry collection, and I'm understood he hasn't read very much from this collection. It's called Machineries of Joy, and he will actually premiere some of the poems for us this evening. And we're so looking forward to hearing from those now. Peter Finch, away to you.
Thanks, Amy. So this is Walking Cardiff, which you saw my fellow creator of this book, John Briggs, holding up a moment ago. John has taken the photographs in the book and come with me and helped design the walks, which is... I thought, first of all, is not going to work in a period of lockdown, but is actually totally suited to lockdown. There's nothing in the book, as far as I can see, that's going to get you into trouble. But let me read just a small slice of it, because this book is really for looking at the photographs of and for reading the text alongside it. But I'll read a little bit about the Cardiff Culture Poetry Ramble. Sometimes the intellectual focus of a place is hard to discern. Cardiff lacks the literary heat of places like Dublin or London or Edinburgh. Our poets, our famous ones, all seem to leave. R.S. to the north, Danny Absey to Golders Green, Gillian Clark to her boothing in Ceredigion. Only the first national poet, Gwyneth Lewis, stays the course up there in Penellan, detecting poetry wherever she can. But in the late 60s, something happened. The counterculture arrived and the world did some shaking. The city's poetry core changed forever. I'm walking with John, tracking this revolution. It's a great 3-mile ramble looking for ghosts. We walk up Great Western Lane towards the Prince of Wales, once a theatre on whose boards stepped Richard Burton, Noel Coward and Vivian Leigh, but now a Wetherspoons pub. Opposite is the Royal Hotel with O'Neill's Bar occupying the whole ground floor. It's where that long-departed son of the city, R.S. Thomas, returned to launch his collected poems in 1993. He gave a typically expressionless dour recital as ever troubling Welsh consciousness with reminders of our status, our language, and our soul. Thomas's counterculture credentials rest with his controversial support for the cottage burners and his opposition to most things that arrived from over the border. His poems radiated stubborn nationalism, a Welsh renegade in a suit and a dog collar. Paradoxically, he wrote his often bitter verse in the language of the conqueror, English. The queue to buy a signed copy snaked right round the room, down the stairs and out. Our route is up St Mary Street until the Sandringham Hotel appears on the right. Dating from the 1880s, the Sandringham started life as an inn called the Black Lion. Look up and you'll see a stone lion still present on the top of the building. As the Sandringham Hotel, it spent most of the 20th century offering reasonably priced accommodation for weekend visitors, sales reps, and wedding guests. In 1995, the hotel opened Cafe Jazz on its ground floor. This offered nightly music for the discerning with free admission to those who brought a meal. As a venue, it still operates today. The poet Barry Mcsweeney read here in the 1990s as part of an Oriel bookshop promoted series perceptively entitled Difficult Poets. The critic Nicholas Johnson called Mcsweeney a contrary, lone wolf, self-styled the Prince of Sparty Lee, who had been prescribed from official records of poetry for 25 years. His poetry, post-Prynne and linguistically enveloping, is among the best left-field UK work British poets have produced. On the night of the reading, a rare one for him, he'd hit the bottle. He arrived slurring and sliding and allowed a half-empty vodka bottle to roll out of his briefcase onto the floor in front of the dais. He then proceeded to read the same poem 8 times, offering, as a finale, a swinging of the microphone round his head as if he were a cowboy trying to lasso a steer. The gig was done for. The Difficult Poets series abandoned, and punters, the place was full of fans, all given their money back. Mcsweeney died in 2000. That's Walking Cardiff. I want to turn to the poetry book, The Machineries of Joy. I thought this title, The Machineries of Joy, came from William Blake. And I put the notion to Amy that the next book should be called The Machineries of Joy, and she liked the title. This was marketable. That's the main thing. You've got to have a handle that people can remember, because the big trick with selling a book is not making it wonderful, it's getting it into the punter's hand. They have to pick it up. Once they picked it up, then you're halfway there. And I thought The Machineries of Joy had this wonderful origin in Blake, but when I came to hunt it down after we'd chosen, it turned out not to be the case. In fact, The Machineries of Joy originated here. It originated in this one, which is Ray Bradbury, the science fiction author's The Machineries of Joy, a terrific collection of short fiction from back in, let me look, 1977. That was him. So I wasn't the first, nor was I the second, because then British Sea Power come along and they do their CD. Wonderful music, The Machineries of Joy. So The Machineries of Joy, this one is in the great tradition. So I'll read a piece of The Road West, the second part of it, the part I don't normally read. The Road West is what it says. It's about the journey moving west. It's what we do in Wales. We move to the west. The connection is not or should not be, back to England. We're flowing away from that. We're moving to our Celtic roots. We're going further west. And the more west we travel, the slower things become. Somebody did some research and tested the speed at which people walked on the pavement in London. And then they did the same measurement in Swindon and the same measurement in Bristol. And they found that it slowed. The further west you went, it slowed. They then went to Cardiff and to Swansea, and it slowed some more. I don't think they went to Haverfordwest, and they certainly didn't go to Solva, but Ivor would testify that it's really crawling pace when you get there. And now the road, still west, clustered now with ancient names. They begin with Bryn, Allt, Aber, Llys, Llyn, Llwyn, and Llan, the landscape snuggling, the hills looking down. Came here with Maclau, fresh up from America decades back on some mash-up tour of fractured sound, me explaining the random to resistant audiences, him balancing books on his head. The way is more vital than the end, Alan Watts said, or something like. In the car park, we pick up a student bound for home on her parents' Carmarthen farm, the veneer of slick fashion falling from her as the trees thicken up. I got diddly on some sort of 8-track Clifford fixed. It's his borrowed car, no antifreeze, and the temperature out there is on its way down. Past the lights of cities everywhere, like frozen stars, we snap and click, west, diddly dum, diddly wow, west and west again, where the roads finally end and the world lies down, but God keeps on, his towers pushing and his spires. The smokestacks ran out miles back, the skies are clear. Maclau, hip flask gone, slumbers in the back, books in a bag. Those places where the docks were everything and the land scarred with steel mill and pit, we've left them. And the bridges from which they hurled rocks at the Polish truck drivers scabbing coal in '84, and then all those towns and cities full of the living, filling their heads with the stuff of nothing, because what else is there to do? We're beyond all that. West, where the land sits quiet and makes no comment, and the voices of the wild duck are ever so faintly white. So when you carry on west, you roar on, you get on Brunel's metal steel liner that will go from Haverfordwest and sail all the way to America, so you could catch a train in London and the same train would take you to New York. That was his idea. So if you do a version of this, as I did, you eventually end up deep down in Mississippi at Clarksdale, which is the famous place, as everybody knows, where Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil for the ability to play that slide guitar. I went down to the crossroad, fell down on my knees. I went down to the crossroad, fell down on my knees, asked the Lord above, have mercy now, save poor Bob, if you please. I got there, pulled in next to the gas station where the homeboys snapped their fingers, stopped in the forecourt of a wrecked refrigerator store, fogged after 500 miles down 61, expecting a monument, found a cutout guitar on a roadside pole. No welcome to Clarksdale, Cotton Town, no mention of Robert Leroy Johnson selling his young man's soul in exchange for 41 incandescent sides at the record store. They tell me that the only blues on live tonight is white stuff. Okay, you know, been like that for a while. John Lee Hooker Lane, empty. Muddy Shack, moved on. They've got his guitar in a museum next to Charlie Musselwhite's shoes. The blues ain't nothing but big-legged mama down in this delicious delta. Only now they're dead-end history. Ghost riders on the car stereo. Memory rattles and hums. So sticking with the music a bit, I've loved this idea of urban myth. I think it was either Topher Mills or Ivor Thomas, one of the two, who introduced me to this when a book of urban myths was published by Picador Books back in the 1970s. Urban myths are those things where your granny is dead on the top of the car and somebody steals it and so forth. Ridiculous things that everybody tells you are absolutely true. So I came up with this one about Jimi Hendrix. I decided that when Jimi Hendrix was in concert here in Cardiff, he got so stoned out of his head that first time he came, that he woke up on one of the islands in the middle of Roath Park Lake and said, "Man, where am I?" And about 10 years passed after I'd included that in Real Cardiff 1. It's in there if you want to check it out. About 10 years after that, someone came up to me and told me the story as if I didn't know it and as if it had been true. Oh, this is wonderful. And then a little bit later, the Made in Roath Festival, also picking up on the same thing, produced a blue plaque celebrating the fact that Jimi Hendrix had woken up on this very island and put the plaque on a tree. And a couple of years after that, I took a cycle tour around Cardiff, and I pulled everybody up by the side of the lake and I pointed to the island and I said, "Look, it's got to be true. There's the plaque. That's where it happened." Hendrix Island, near the lake, inland in what was once a malarial swamp. The fallen tree is fenced, its pollarded bulk like a broken car. Last summer, in a storm of psychogeography, I brought the bike tour here, told them about Hendrix waking on that islet, no idea how he arrived or where he was. There's a plaque now, fantasy, memorialized, island edge. They all nod. I read a lyric, the past, a palimpsest, fictioned into fashionable fact. I read the event reported later, internet, somewhere, as if it happened. Real now, slight return. Yes, yes. So sticking with these things which happen to you when you get older, which we weren't, but we are. Bladder. In the clinic, the bladder is king, a bright thing, full of bliss. I watch the doors along the corridor open to usher out the desperate and the damned who've just been told, once calm and unwitting, now shaking with despair. Age here is ubiquitous, except me, a decade back when I first arrived, but now me also, fragile and stumbling, waiting in line. The doctors have lives outside all this, where they grow beans like green razors and play squash in titanic volleys, sweat and breath filling them with joy. But today they have their caring voices in their mouths, telling us slowly where the pathology leads. X-rays on their screens like Bacon paintings, grapefruit in cross-section filled with demon papillary dark markers where earlier manifestations have been taken away. We will have to see how it progresses, they tell me, like builders saying we fixed it, we think. See how it goes, wait till it rains. All aspect of bladder work undertaken, no job too big, no job too small. Fill it with bitumen, blow lamp it. Outside, as ever, it rains. Second-hand magazine you heard mentioned before was a magazine I produced back in the 1960s and 1970s. And I've got a poem here. I've got to read two rather experimental pieces. And the great Bob Cobbing told me that there was absolutely nothing that could not be read in public. There was no sort of poem that you could not perform. Now, Bob specialized in performing smears of ink on pages. And on this particular occasion, we were in a pub in Oxford upstairs at an event. And he dropped his manuscripts on the floor. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he turned and performed the wallpaper. He performed the smears in the wallpaper, in which he told me he could see letter forms. So undaunted, I will read things that can't be read. Second Ian magazine in numbers. Second Ian Poetry Journal, edited by Peter Finch, 1966 to 1974. 2020, 1965, 1984, 1947, 500, 14 and 10, 1950s, 2001, 2010, 2 and 6, 8 to the bar, beat me, 12 stones, 2 pounds, half a mile, 50% of a hectare, third of a pint, a gallon, a gaggle, a grasp, a grip, 3.1.251999 19 60 60 60 60 60 66 10 guineas print bill. A 470 Manor Way. Church Road, turn left, Station Road, Llandaff North, the Pineapple, led to Second Ian, bright yellow, 64mm, hard size, 16, foolscap pages, 2 staples, rust, William Wantling, Glyn Jones, William Burroughs, Kingsley Amis, said no. Redgrove, many American stars and European concretists, Welsh wizards, English poetasters, criticised for spelling the name Dom Sylvester Huidard 3 different ways in the same issue. 1974, sold 3,000 copies, 1,000 more in a box. Issue 19 to 21, big boy cover by Tony Rickaby, Wales replete, pull your twat hun, lol, none left now. Took nearly 40 years, ISIS 037-025, copy in the loft, foxed, illegible, my last one. So that answers your question, Amy. One of the poems from this book was chosen as Guardian Poem of the Week. Now, Guardian Poem of the Week is, you get your poem around, a lot of people get their attention drawn to the book in which it comes and to the poem itself, and they make suitable comments. So this is very interesting because you then get a kind of debate going on between the critic who wrote about it, was Carol Rumans, and whoever agreeing and disagreeing. But then you also have to put up with the slightly strange people who think it's their opportunity to write their version of the poem or a poem or anything, stimulated by the title of mine. And mine was called Fish. So if you want to look that up in The Guardian, there's an awful lot of stuff about fish in there. The poem is a poem, again, about pulling bits of the Welsh literary past and a few other things together. And it's interesting the way that people tried to work out, well, what the author means is this. And I have to say that they all got it wrong. Here we go. Fish. He wrote the things decades back. He did them underwater. He pulled them out like sonic fish. Dada hake, Bauhaus trout, Schwitter's skate. Showed them to Ormond, who shook his head. You've energy, Finch, but they'll not put that on your grave, flailing in the Welsh fog. This man punctuates using the chance methods of John Cage. Potatoes, potatoes, potatoes. There are monkeys and there are typewriters, and the two shouldn't be allowed to mix. Your leaflet advertising your amateur magazine is a joke, is it not? Beer mats, they read better, boy. Bwthyn, Llanbradach, Cariad, Hiraeth, Pysgodyn. Finch has never used words like those. Vous êtes une nation poétique sans concours, dit Chopin, piling on the microparticles, sans, son, si, sip, sis, ya, ratata, ratatata, ratata, tick, ta, tick, tick, ta, 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 tick, tick, da, 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 Chopin, 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 Chopin. This is an incorrect claim. Wales is a nation of standard stoppages, engaging with pasteurized modernism 40 years outside the frame. I sound now like Kingsley Amis. It's come to this at last. Asked him once to send in a poem. Got a postcard back reading, Mr. Amis regrets, but he cannot do as you ask. So I'll read one that's a little bit more familiar. The things that, to some degree, all the books of poetry that came out in Wales during the 1970s were about this. Wales. Bigger than Texas, fairer than Era, finer than Indochina, redder than Belarus, faster than Andorra, older than Mexico, slicker than Swiss, Frencher than France, harder than the Infertada, more literate than Liechtenstein, as moderate as Monaco, as hilly as Chile, cleaner than Argentina, more beer than Kashmir, more widgets than Egypt, votes Labour like Jamaica, not a failure like Australia, nor full of plates like the States, more cloudy than Saudi, more drizzly than Italy, as homely as Estonia, more history than Transnistria, as tribal as the Bible, more weather than the Netherlands, mightier than Haiti, stronger than Uganda, as lovely and holy as Mongolia, once industrial, now pastoral, like Norway, much crack like Iraq, as sturdy as Cape Verde, and about as British as Mauritius. Wales, hard to know. Just when you think you do, you don't. And I read this at the Edge Festival in Solva, and I got to the bit where it said something about Australia, and this woman shouted out at the back, and I thought, bloody hell, what I need to do before I start is find out if any of you come from any of these countries. So hands up now if you do. Good. So that was safe then. That's the first Zoom conference audience participation, hands up. Is it not? Where's she gone? Maybe not. I'll read two more. I'll read a poem for Scarlett, a family poem. Somebody said, one of the critics of this book, that Finch is now dealing with human subjects. All right. Scarlett, 2/6/2010. She was born when it was hot and dry, and on TV they were already showing parched parks and empty reservoirs, banks bent like desert maps, dust and desperation as far as the eye could see. In the world in which she was about to step, bankers were trying hard to stay afloat. Governments in fiscal panic were all hoping not to sink. Without asking, the newspapers arrived with further dismal stories. You'd think it really was the end. She couldn't smile then, couldn't focus, could only cry, and she did that with blue eyes and a furious face. Later, she'll fix it, the world, and fiercely she'll love it. Sunk or not, it'll be hers, not ours. That's the way. That's the way. That's the way it is. And I'll finish off with, or should I carry on? Where are we? Amy, Sarah, you want to do questions?
Yeah, let's do one more and then we'll open the floor to some questions.
Do one more. Okay. I'll do two more. How about that? This is one that some of you will know if you've been to one of my readings in the recent past. I got to the stage where I've spent a lifetime of dealing with construction workers, electricians, plumbers, builders, bricklayers, plasterers, people who dig trenches and put things in them, people who fill the trenches in afterwards, tarmackers, the rest of it. And it always seems to go wrong. I thought back through 40 years of employing people and trying to find out, were any of those occasions 100% successful? No. They're all like this. Crap builders. 40 years of house repair has taught me, in all this time, the ones who cope can be counted on a single hand. Not the drain clearer who wanted to demolish the garden wall, nor the flat roofer who just fixed the edges and left the leaks to pour, nor the man replacing the wall ties with empty holes. Not those. Not the plumber who took 3 weeks to dig a trench which filled with rain and then fused the street lamps, nor the developer who buried the manholes beneath feet of soil, ran the ring main down the wall's cavity, then rehung the doors with half a screw to each. He was crap, for sure. I have a lifetime of astonishment that professionals forever turn out to be amateurs. No job is ever too big, and none is ever too small. They always cut corners in order to finish at 4. The latest installed drains with no traps and a drive that sank when you parked your car. Tomorrow a man is coming who will replace the mismatched bricks in the garage with further mismatchings, and then accidentally spray the path with a slurry of cement that will set overnight in a Jackson Pollock swirl. There are no solutions beyond learning yourself. Join the club. In the bathroom, the tiles are straight, but not the door. Above the mirror is the expel air. This fan, once a roaring triumph, can now only whimper. To fix it, I toggle the switch, but the whole thing falls in a thrash of plaster and a pall of dust. My mobile goes. Unfazed, I answer, no matter what the world does. Crap builders always have time for their phones. And I'll finish with a life. Begins with a John Berryman quote. I stalk my mirror down this corridor. I stalk my mirror down this corridor. I try for it, evaluating what's been done. My poems scattered through the years. The unrecalled read again. Fixing lost emotion. Bending pain, running rough with what they say. They don't hoot as much now, I've read them 100 times. The language stretched in brash screeds, plastered and dried. Tock, trim, toot, track, flash. Graves collected his, each year abandoning more than he added. File shrinking, never understood, do now, more in the recycled than the book, how it should be. Diolch fawr.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was great, as always. So, if anyone has any questions, you should be able to unmute yourselves. So, I think does anyone have anything they'd like to say or ask Peter or anything else? Oh, Amy's asking me if you can read the title poem.
Yeah, I can. Does she know what page it's on? I got it. You want to hear the title poem, yes? It's only short. The Machineries of Joy. Bach and his student assistant have set up their machineries of joy at the end of the pet food aisle. Bach and his student assistant have set up their machineries of joy at the end of the pet food aisle at Sainsbury's. They offer industrial quantities of symphony and sonata ready repackaged to all comers, but there are few today. A woman with a home-knit cardigan and NHS issue stick admonishes JS for being way too productive. Her husband's many concerti, she complains, don't sell as they once did. This is, she says, because Bach's cost less. Outside, in the sky, a great wheel of seagulls circle, the drinkers on the benches slumber. At home, a bald, bent man sits in a room writing on sheaves of stave paper. This is his obsession. He knows it is all ultimately pointless because the kids don't listen anymore, if they ever did, but he doesn't care.
Great. I can see we've got at least 3 people have unmuted themselves. Who'd like to go first? We've got John Briggs, John Osmond, or Leo. Anyone want to say something first? John Briggs, take it away.
I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's enjoyable, and it's a difficult task, I should think, Peter.
Well, you've got
a remote audience. I did one myself yesterday. It's strange.
It's very strange. You don't have that connection with an audience.
That's correct, but it was great. It was great. Excellent. Thank you.
Good.
John Briggs, do you want to say something?
I would just like to say that if anyone would like to see, I don't know if you can see them very well, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4 copies of Peter's second Aeon magazine. The photograph is actually on page 30 of Walking Cardiff. And can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the middle photograph, the middle black and white photograph, is a picture of Peter himself, aged
Somewhere. Yeah.
28, something like that. And I was very privileged to have these copies, perhaps a few others, lent to me by Peter so that I could photograph them under the statues in front of the Morgan building in Cathays Park, where Peter worked as a civil servant, I think, running the band machine, was it, in the office for how many years?
Local government officer, not
Local
civil servant.
Right.
They were a cut above.
Right. Well, that's my 2 cents worth anyway.
Oh, thank you. Yes, John, I think most of you know, but John took the photographs in the Walking Cardiff book, and he and Peter are currently working on Walking the Valleys, or they were when they unfortunately been stopped for.
Sort of are, but yeah, okay.
It's mentioned in a blog that Peter wrote for us on the Seren blog a few weeks ago. John Osmond, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yes, I just wanted to ask whether the current situation, so-called crisis, this kind of thing, to what extent do you think it inspires or incentivizes writers to write, or do they do it, generally speaking, in retrospect? To what extent do they do it at the time? I remember, for example, during the miners' strike, back in the mid-80s, Kim Howells, who was then the kind of spokesperson for the miners in South Wales, it was South Wales, bemoaning the fact that writers weren't coming up to their jumps and responding to the situation. He felt that somehow this national, and by national he meant Welsh, now this national emergency required writers to respond, and he was speaking to a meeting of the Union of Writers at the time, but he was bemoaning the fact that they did not.
Well, if you're asking me,
and I wondered, I'm asking what you think about what I've just said.
well, it so happens that in the middle of the crisis, a couple of weeks back, I got a commission from Wales Arts Review to write what do you think, where are we going, what's it like reaction piece. And I did the very thing that you're suggesting that Kim Howells said that writers didn't. And that was, I went out and I deliberately walked along the deserted streets. I went up the hill. And I was driven by two things. I wanted to feel, what was this like? What could I write about? How were the birds different? There was this sense of otherness, which I wanted to try and capture. And the best way to capture that was to walk through the middle of it. Simultaneously, with this going on, I'd read about the setting fire to the forestry and the hillscapes, mountainscapes, at the top end of the Rhondda, starting in Rhegos and coming down as far as Gelli. And I started thinking, well, that's it. Put these together. We've got this world in which we're trapped indoors. It's like something out of a J.G. Ballard novel. And we've got the fire roaring down on the tops of the valleys. It's heading towards Cardiff. It's going to come whooshing over Caerphilly Mountain. So I then started to try and imagine, well, what was it like? I'm walking up the hill if I can see the smoke coming towards me. I couldn't. But what would it be like if I could? Anyway, and the pieces came together. And the only way that could be written was by walking through it and then pulling my notebook out of my pocket and writing the thing down there and then. Because I think if I'd gone back home and sat down, by that time there would be that interference, that gap, and I would be Wordsworthian, reflecting emotion in tranquility, and I didn't want to reflect it in tranquility.
Great. Graham Davies, do you have something that you wanted to ask?
Peter, not quite such a profound question as the last one, but I was wondering how you dealt with the unhappy Australian, the solver.
I apologise. This is happening to me a lot now. No, I apologised and said I really made a mistake there, and I really should have asked in advance. Actually, if I had asked in advance and I'd said, are there any Australians here? And she'd put her hand up, I probably would have avoided the poem. But the next time I did a reading, I thought, forewarned is forearmed. And this was the Builder's poem. So before I read it, I said to the audience, I think this might even have been at the launch, I said to the audience, are there any builders here? Please put your hands up. Not a single hand went up. So I made a joke about it being okay, and I read the poem. Then this woman came up to me afterwards, sort of angry, and I said, look, I've asked about this. She said, I'm married to a builder. You can't win.
Even more fierce.
Thanks. Hayley, did you have something that you wanted to ask?
Not a question, which is probably, your stomach sinks when someone says that. It's not a question. It's a thank you. That was a beautiful reading, and I'm very happy I made it tonight. I also wanted to say thank you because I have this book here. I'm hoping this is yours, and this is not another Peter Finch.
No, it's mine.
By Seren as well. And I just wanted to thank you because it gave me a lot of advice when I was starting my press. And lots of very sage advice. And when I saw you were talking, I thought, I've got to say thank you.
Don't you recognise me from the picture?
Well, I think your jaw's slightly more in place than in this book. But it's an excellent book. And I just really wanted to say thank you because it meant an awful lot when I started. Lots of sensible advice. There's a lot of books that give you fluffy advice, but this was full of sage advice. And I also just really like that you mentioned Bob Cobbing, because I've got him here as well. And if anyone was wondering about his work, because I volunteer with Veer Books, and we were producing his A to Z poems as well, so I fell in love with him a bit. That's the kind of poems he'd perform, I imagine.
That's exactly it. That's precisely the thing that he was doing when we were in Oxford and he was reading the wallpaper. In fact, that looks like the wallpaper.
Yeah, and there's like his photocopy art and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I love this book. It's fantastic. Very inspiring. So no, thank you very much for your time tonight. I really loved it.
Thank you.